Hello, good morning. Welcome to the History Center. I'm Pam Stranahan, the retiring president of the Friends of the History Center. And we really thank you for joining us today. We have a lot of people here from the Friends of the History Center. Who are you guys? Give us a wave. And then we have a lot of folks from the Quilters. Let's see it from them. This is wonderful turnout. Thank you so much. So it's always our pleasure to recognize the elected officials who might be out supporting us today. So I'd like to call on Carol Thompson, who is from the Quilting group. Okay, and it's been my honor to serve as president of the Friends of the History Center. This January, however, we have a new set of officers prepared to lead this organization forward. So at this time, I'd like to recognize them. First of all, Lucretia Jones, who is the treasurer. And next, Kay Betts, who is secretary. And finally, Vicki Merchant, who will serve as the new president. And at this time, Vicki would like to introduce the program.
Thanks, Pam. Pam has been a founding member, and she was one of the visionaries to get this show on the road, and it has turned out to be fantastic. And we have,
hey, Pam.
Yes, and we have big shoes to fill with our exiting officers. Cam Waggart in the back, she's our best vice president, and then Pam has been president, and we can't thank them enough. It's really an honor to work with them. We want to have a special thank you to the Peacemakers by the Bay Guild and their organization's dedication to community service. When you see when you come through the exhibit, the whole back room recognizes those organizations that they support for no charge at all. They really work hard. Many thanks to the Education Committee who helped research the history of quilts during the specific eras of our history. Hopefully you'll take a little time and look at those. Maureen, would you please stand up? Maureen and I were the curators of this exhibit and worked with the Peacemakers for several days. Lloyd Matthews, Kay Betts, Maureen, Pam, and myself researched all those eras. On display also is a quilt donated by Craig Ashley in honor of his grandmother, Mrs. McLester, who worked with other ladies in 1966 to create a quilt made of a type of fabric paint. And many of those sign names are very recognizable by members of our community. So while you're here, if you would like to join us, we would love for you to become members of the History Center, and we have, with John and David over here, we have the sign-up sheet as well as the membership. So we'd love to have you. And we also will have, we have a free raffle. A free raffle means that you can fill out one stub a day, as many days as you come, and we really like donations, so we appreciate that. Anyway, we are excited to welcome Susie Brock Black, who needs no introduction in our community. Susie and her mom Polly were two of the 8 who were the founding members of Peacemakers by the Bay in 1991. And the Guild was organized to educate and preserve the art of quilting. It was her idea to raffle a quilt for the fundraiser for the Texas Maritime Museum, and the grand prize for the raffle is another Susie Brock Black original. It's hanging on the wall as you come in. Her pervading interests include anything related to fabric, sewing, quilting, embroidery, fabric, painting, and fabric collecting. She loves to use vintage fabrics, old linens, hankies, and neckties to create one-of-a-kind treasures. She also serves on several philanthropic boards in South Texas, and it's a pleasure to welcome her to our festivities this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Quilters Memories, Then and Now. This is a collaboration between the Friends of the History Center and the Peacemakers by the Bay Quilt Guild. Yay, Peacemakers. Quilting has gone full circle many times, from a luxury for the ladies of Europe to a survival tool for the pioneer women, to a social opportunity during the cattle drive era, to a necessity during the Great Depression, then to a rest period, then back with a vengeance as a hobby, social outlet, art form, and even career opportunity. In my research, I found no history on quilting in Aransas County before the Peacemakers were organized. So this brief history lesson will reference the great state of Texas. There were few comforts for a woman colonizing into Texas in the early 1800s before Texas was a state. Travel was primitive, and quite often the women came after their husbands, which left them facing possible Indian or pirate attacks, sickness or injury without medical care, rough trails, and of course, ever-changing Texas weather. Jane Long was the first woman in Texas who knew how to make quilts. Now, in case you are thinking how nice and picturing a little old lady quilting by the fire, it is important to note that Stephen F. Austin counted her among the members of the Old 300, the first immigrant colony of Texas. She was directly involved with many of the most significant personalities and events of Texas history, including John Lafitte and Colonel Travis. I also understand in research she received many marriage proposals. Texas became a state in 1845, and in the first U.S. Census in 1850, Texas reported 212,592 citizens. The important thing here is this rapid growth was a result of immigrants coming in family units. The quilting bee established itself as one of the main social events in sparsely settled areas of Texas. Women would come from miles around to the home of the one who had the quilt tops. The men would join in the evening for a meal, dancing, singing. Business transactions were discussed, and marriageable young people got the chance to check each other out. But remember, life was very hard for these pioneer families, and a brightly colored quilt was a warm and cheerful addition to the household. Texas had been a state less than 20 years when the Civil War began. While men were away fighting, the burdens on women at home increased. Commodities of all kinds were scarce, and any scraps of fabric that could be used in a quilt top were precious. There are but a few quilts preserved in museums from this time period. They are utility in nature due to the scarcity of materials and time. From after the Civil War to 1900 was the period of cattle drives. It is during this time that two social institutions encouraged the making of quilts in Texas, and they're still with us today, the fair and the church. The first staging of what is now the State Fair of Texas occurred in Dallas in 1886 and included a quilt contest. Churches became a dominant cultural force, which included camp meetings, revivals, and church quilting groups. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, the government took all the wool produced for commercial use and instituted heatless Mondays. So you can imagine how welcome quilts were in the home at that time. In the late 1920s and 1930s, quilts were popular, with patterns being printed regularly in newspapers and magazines. With the severe economic hardships caused by the Depression, many people simply did not have the money to buy blankets, so quilting using everything you had became the norm. This is the prime time period for the use of feed sacks, a collaborative term generally used to describe fabric sacks made to hold feed, sugar, flour, and many other commodities. This time period also brought back the quilting club, or bee, as it was both a way of sharing the work and providing a social outlet. During World War II, quilt making continued to be a popular activity in Texas. The Red Cross effort was frequently supported with signature quilts, where people paid a small fee to have their name embroidered on a square. They were then made into a quilt, raffled off, and the proceeds donated to the Red Cross. After the war, interest in quilting declined. There were fewer rural communities, less need for the necessity of homemade quilts in the home, and the beginning of young women joining the workforce. All of these factors contributed to quilt making being perceived as old-fashioned. It was the bicentennial celebration of 1976 that made quilting cool again. Quilt shops opened, quilt guilds formed, quilt designers, authors, and artists found a large, receptive national audience. Quilt making had come home, where it remains today as a powerful, poignant testimony to our past, a record of our brief time here on this earth, and a hope for the future. If you are a quilter, or a quilt admirer, or even better, a quilt purchaser, you already appreciate the materials so carefully selected, the skills required, and the vision and feelings transferred from the maker to the finished piece. A quilt may be fabric and stitches, but let me tell you what else it is, or it can be. It can provide both warmth and emotional comfort to a child. It can express love, joy, and hope in honor of a new marriage or welcome a new baby into the world. You can preserve memories of someone special to you by using their shirts, dresses, t-shirts, neckties, and hankies in a quilt. It can give comfort, warmth, and love to someone going through a difficult medical issue or emotional time in their life. And finally, it can be an expression of art and beauty. So I invite you to come back to the History Center over the next few weeks, hear the stories, see the talent on display as the Friends of the History Center and the members of Peacemakers by the Bay Quilt Guild present you with an important part of our history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susie. We now invite you to have refreshments out at the gazebo, and come on in. Just please sign in so we'll get our count on how many people were here. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming.